Text your friends about next service. Tell them to get ready. But hey, if you're here because it's a new year and you're looking for new routines, welcome. Thanks for jumping in. Or if you were with us on Christmas Eve and now you're back, awesome. Glad you're here. As a matter of fact, I want to go to Christmas Eve real quickly, and I think I might have a couple of pictures to show you in case you missed it. But it was just a really fun event. I snapped that one before service just to kind of get the vibe. But you can scroll them pretty quickly. But somebody took this from a food truck just to kind of show you a little bit of the crowd. But it was fun. It was exciting. There was a lot of moving parts to the evening. And you can stop right there because I think that's a pretty cool picture. Not just because it's me, but because we're literally in the place where we do Friday Night Lights every week, and we were able to proclaim Jesus as the light of the world. So I just thought that was a pretty cool thing. And everything just kind of moved very smoothly for the whole thing, and there was just a ton of people, and it really feels like something we should probably try to do again. And don't write it down yet, but it just feels like something we should try to do again. And then you can stop right there. And then some of you maybe saw this on Facebook or somewhere like that, but it's for my family. We have 3 kids, and there's 2 grandkids and 1 on the way. But because everybody, for the most part, works at church, we're working right up until Christmas. And so we usually get together after Christmas. And so we had everybody stay at our house, and at least 2 people were interested in my online message last week, okay? So they just thought, man, that's really cool. And then they would look back at me and go, what's happening? So there's a couple other pictures in there, but my wife does not know that's in there, so we might need to edit that later. Okay, stop right here, because this kid, listen, I buy what's on the Christmas list. I didn't impose this on her in the least bit. She requested this, and then we came up here to the office and took a picture together the next day. Go to it. There we go. And she was just so excited about that. And so right there, and I'm going to refer back to this here in a little bit, but that's our people, that's our tribe. And so we got to hang out. We made cookies, we made pizza, we watched football, we watched The Grinch, we watched Trash Truck. If you're not watching Trash Truck, you need to get on board. And just had a really great time together. So that's us. That was our time together. And we played at the park. We did some pickleball. We built block towers, tents, read books. And then the rest of the time, it was like I'm in my element now at this stage in my life. I just walked around and turned off lights. Anybody else? And it was just like, what's going on around here right now? Whose is this? And let me turn that light off. So we're back, rested, rejuvenated. I was ready to leave 2024 behind. Anybody else? It sucked so bad, I was just like, I'm going to move on to 25. I'm very excited about 25. I'm optimistic. As a church, we always take the first part of every year, and we hit reset, and we launch into the new year with what makes us, okay? And so those of you who are regular, you've heard this many times before. You could probably come up here and do a 2-minute presentation on it. But if you're our guest, I want to give you an idea of what kind of place that we are, because I do think that God has a very special mission for us. And you can read it out there in the lobby. We say it this way, that Christ Church Camden is on a mission to lead specifically people who are disconnected. That might be relationships, church, Jesus, and people who are unfulfilled, meaning and purpose and significance. And then together, can we all just grow towards experiencing and living this full life that Jesus offers to us? And so we've talked about that many times over the years, and that's not exactly what we're going to be doing here, but it's the setup to talk about the fact that I do believe we have a very clear mission, but there's a strategy to actually achieve it. And the strategy has 3 primary values to them. And we say it this way. You'll find them on the wall over in our cafe. You'll read them on a sign somewhere or on some literature somewhere. But more importantly than just the idea of these values is that they literally do drive everything that we do as a church. And so they are values that focus on the things that we are for. Okay, we say first and foremost that we're for Jesus. We are for each other. That's the people in this room. The first service, the third service, I include the people in our community who are followers of Jesus. We're for the family of God, okay? So we're for Jesus, we're for each other, and we're for Camden, okay? We want to make our community better by being here. And what we want to do in the next 3 weeks is challenge ourselves to say that if we all just kind of took our next step, okay, to grow in these areas, not only would we see that mission be accomplished, but I also believe that you would grow to become the person person that I think you want to be and the person that God has in mind for you to be. And so we're going to kind of just wrap the series in this idea of metaphor. And I know it's cheesy and silly, and everybody else said, please don't do that. And I was like, I have to. We got to go for it. And so it's just simple. I just want to provide a different picture or an image or an idea for us each week so that we can better understand the value. Okay, and that's all we're doing here. And today I want to start with the call to be growing in our love for Jesus. And I want to be clear about this, to say that of all the things we do as a church, that the pursuit of Jesus is our highest value. Okay, he is the supreme leader of our church. I carry a title. Other people have titles. Jesus is the leader of our church, okay? And so we're captivated by Jesus. We want to know him. We want to come to rely on and follow his words and his ways. And the image I just kind of want to set in front of us today to talk about that is the idea or the image of a treasure. That there is something of value that is worth pursuing. There's a quest that we need to go on. I mean, how many of you have had a moment, maybe recently, maybe it was wrapped in Christmas, I don't know, where you go, man, I didn't know I needed this, but I have to have it. And how have I lived without it to this point in my life, right? Or you're kind of on the other side of that where you go, okay, I know what I need and what it is that I'm actually looking for, and I've looked everywhere, but I didn't give up, and then I finally found it. So when we talk about for Jesus, that's the idea I want, is a treasure, something of value and the quest to have it. Jesus, by the way, was the best person to place images in front of us. And oftentimes he would say, okay, this idea that I'm trying to describe to you, this right here, well, it's a lot like this. And then he would give us an image. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the image that Jesus gives us. So if you're new to Bible study, 4 people write about the life of Jesus. They are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew records a lot of different parables that Jesus told. We're going to look at 2 very short stories in Matthew 13. And this is verse 44, where it starts this way. This is Jesus speaking. He says, the kingdom of heaven. And I want to stop. Both stories begin this way. And I think we need to give it a minute because Jesus actually tells 6 stories in this chapter, and they all begin the exact same way. And it's Jesus' way of saying, hey, if you'll just listen to this for a second, you will learn something about the kingdom of heaven. Or he will sometimes use the phrase, the kingdom of God. Same thing, okay? Now, when Jesus talks about the kingdom, he has a few things in mind, okay? A lot of us understand, we hear that, and we go, oh, that must be heaven. And yes, that's true, but it's also earth, okay? So it's the kingdom is anywhere where God is the king, which then would include the heart of every person who claims to be a devoted follower of his. So the kingdom is about God's rule, and it's about God's reign. And you enter the kingdom at salvation. And then you continue to live in this kingdom in what I would describe as an entirely counter-cultural kind of way. Like, I think that's so important. We're going to teach it for several weeks coming up, but the kingdom it's here right now, and then it's also not quite yet. So if I could summarize it this way, the kingdom is about life with God through Jesus, and we experience together what he called the full life. That's the kingdom. So it says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. And when a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, he went and sold all that he had and bought that field. Now, kind of given what Jesus seems to be talking about here, the best thing I can come up with and what I think is probably happening here is this is a guy who's likely out working in a field, and he's just plowing along, right? He's trying to get his 8 hours in, and he's just kind of doing his own thing, and then he hits something. Right? And he didn't see anything coming because whatever it was that he just hit was actually buried under the surface of the earth. So he likely digs a little bit, pulls out something, much to his surprise, it's a steel briefcase full of cash. That's what we're talking about. I mean, that's not terribly uncommon, okay, especially in the first century. This really happened from time to time because there were no banks, right? There was no place to actually kind of keep your money, and you're in an area, right, that's constantly at war, and so nothing was safe. Like people all the time would literally bury their belongings so that they couldn't be taken from them. They couldn't be stolen. And the only way to actually lose it was to actually die. And at least it was still hidden, right? So the law said that as a worker, once this man finds this treasure, if he claims it, it actually belongs to his boss. So probably why he makes a quick decision before anyone actually sees him is to hide it again so that it's safe, and then to go away and figure out a way to actually buy the field, which is apparently what he did. Now, you have to conclude that the amount of the treasure is worth more than the price of the land, meaning whatever it's going to actually cost for that trade, he's actually willing to make it. So he probably has a hard time. Listen, if you did this, if you came across something like this while you're working, who would have a hard time finishing out the day? You'd be like, listen, I'm out of here. I don't owe you an explanation. This is my notice, forget y'all. I'll probably be your boss next week, okay? That's what you'd say. So he's so excited about it, right? Everything's about to change in his life, and it's going to get better because of the decision that he's making. So I picture a guy who probably goes home, he retells the entire story to his wife, he puts the car on eBay, we drop a for sale sign in the front yard, we put all the rest of our belongings on Facebook Marketplace, probably starts an unnamed GoFundMe to generate some cash. Next thing you know, he's down at the bank, right, and he's signing papers, and he's the proud owner of a field of dirt. Okay? Which makes absolutely no sense to anybody else in his life. They probably think it's ridiculous, except, you got to keep in mind that the treasure in his mind is going to be so life-changing for him and his family that he will gladly rearrange parts of his life to possess it. Now, Jesus hardly ever explains any of these short stories, and he doesn't do that here. So he just rolls right into story number 2 in verse 45. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant who's looking for fine pearls. And when he found one of great value, he went away, sold everything he had, and he bought it. So a little bit different than the first story. Now we have a guy who's literally a treasure hunter, right? That's his job. He's consciously out there searching kind of for the big one. Right? He's Ben Gates from National Treasure. He's looking for the very best pearl that he can find. And people listening to the story would go, oh, nice, yeah, because like the pearl, that's the very best thing they could actually imagine, right? And just like the worker, when he found it, he knew that it could potentially transform everything about his life if he could just get it. So he likely says to somebody, hey, just kind of put that on layaway, save that for me, I'll be back to pick it up later. So he goes home, he probably has a conversation with his family, and they have an estate sale, and they put together as much cash as they possibly can. He goes back, he actually buys it. Again, probably seems really crazy to everybody else in his life, but it's a trade that he's willing to make because of the value that it's going to bring to his life. Now, you got to keep in mind, okay, we are talking about the kingdom, which is really this big, overarching, sometimes hard to describe and easily hard to grasp idea that Jesus presents. So for our purposes, in just kind of the next few minutes, I want to steer your thoughts towards thinking of the treasure, okay, as Jesus himself, if I could. And when you think about growing in your love for Jesus, it starts with number one, finding Jesus. And some of you super Bible scholars might want to debate me on that and say, well, doesn't Jesus or God actually find us? And that would be a great discussion, and we could have that if you buy coffee or lunch or something like that. I'm just using these two stories today to talk about two different ways that we find the kingdom, or I want to say find Jesus. Some of us, like the very first man, we accidentally stumbled upon Jesus. That's what he did. He accidentally stumbled upon it, right? You moved to the area, and you had a neighbor reach out to you, and they said, hey, why don't you come to church with us, right? Your kids are going to love it. And because it was new and you were in new routines and a new place, you're like, okay, maybe we'll give it a shot. And you weren't looking for church, right? Let alone any kind of a relationship with Jesus. And you found something, right? And you didn't even know it was missing, or you actually needed it in your life. It was completely accidental. Some of us showed up at an event, right? A men's event or a women's event or some kind of a marriage event or something for our kids or our teenagers, right? You came to preschool or Mother's Day out or something like that, and it was free childcare. You're like, well, let's go do it. And You were looking for a date. You came to an event. I don't know. You weren't intentionally looking for Jesus. You just stumbled into him, right? Listen, some people have been scrolling Facebook on a Sunday morning and our worship service pops up and they didn't know that was going to happen. And then all of a sudden they find themselves watching, and people have watched one service and shown up for another service. Or I bet some of us, it probably happened this way. We literally had a crisis in our life and things were falling apart, and we were open, right? We were a little bit raw, and God was there for us, and it just happened, right? We just accidentally stumbled. We weren't looking. You didn't expect it. You just stumbled into a relationship with Jesus, which means, again, listen, many of us, this is how we came back to Jesus, right? We went away for a while, and we thought we were going to do our own thing, and we didn't need it, and then, okay, we stumbled into Jesus, which means some of us or our friends will in the future come to God this way. Not because we're looking, okay, but because we accidentally stumbled upon it. And then, okay, we found him and we just couldn't resist. Man, look, how amazing is this, right? And we willingly gave control of our lives over to his leadership and his rule in our life. Okay, here's why. Because the life that we suddenly found accidentally was better than the life that we currently had. First guy accidentally stumbles. Second guy, he found it with an intentional search. Okay, entirely different. I mean, how many of you have shopped for a car recently? Has anybody done this? We just did this 2 years ago, and then you guys remember a lot of the storms we had back in the first week of July? My wife calls me and she goes, "That tree has fallen on the car and I can't drive home." Okay, so we're back on the search again. And so the way I do that, I just start asking around. Hey, does anybody know anything? Anybody got any leads on something? My wife, though, she will actually get online and she'll pull up websites and she'll look and she'll set them up side by side and do a comparison, and she'll get email alerts when something pops up that she's interested in, and then so we'll do all the research, and then we'll go to place after place, and we'll walk around the lot, and we'll read sticker after sticker, and we'll sit in the driver's seat and figure out how much legroom this one has versus that one. We'll spend hours test driving vehicles. We'll have mechanics look under the hood. And then the day comes, you go, man, this is the one. We found it. And it took a while, but we got the one. Some of you look for a spouse this way, right? You got on Match or Bumble or Christian Mingle. I don't know if the Christian Mingle is a thing or not. Anybody know if that's a thing? Who's going to admit it, right? In a similar way, this is how a lot of us came to Jesus, right? You had questions. You wondered about something. You tested it, and you researched it, and you studied it, and maybe you didn't know exactly what it was that you were looking for, and maybe you went down some wrong roads to get there, but you stayed with it because you just knew it was there somewhere. If I just keep searching, I'm going to find it. And many of us found life in Jesus because we were consciously searching for it. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to in here after a service or out there in the lobby or at some event we've done before, and they'll say, man, listen, this is exactly what I've been looking for, right? There's a search. There's been a pursuit there. Some of you went away from church for a while, or you actually drifted away in your relationship with Jesus, and you came back to him, right? Earnest search. It's easy. You grew up in church, right? You even were baptized, and then you hit college and young adult life, and you're like, I don't know if I believe any of that or not, and I was too young to understand, and I'm just going to go do it. But then you're like, you know what? Maybe that was right. Let me actually search, and that's what brought you back. Which means, okay, some of us, and we're not there yet, but you are right now wondering. You're asking some questions, and you're investigating, and you're searching, and you come here, and I hope that's because it's a safe place for you to have that process. When you finally do submit to the King and the kingdom, it will be because you've been pursuing it for a while now. So whether the finding of Jesus is accidental or intentional, if the first step is to find Jesus, then the next step is to follow Jesus. Now listen, I already know what you're thinking. You're like, listen, we didn't even meet last week. You've had 2 weeks. This is what you've come up with today? We're going to find Jesus and follow Jesus. But can you understand this today, that this is going to be so simple. This whole message is so simple. But simple should not be confused with shallow. Are we clear on that? Like if you walk out of here today and you're like, I didn't get anything out of that, that's your fault, okay? That's not my fault. That is because you're like, you know what? I don't want to do the hard work to ask the questions that we're asking. But it is so simple, and it should be simple, the burden of action lies on you, okay? Number one, there's finding Jesus. Two, there's following Jesus. And following Jesus always indicates that there's movement. Can you just listen to these 30 seconds right here? Because the entire thing hinges on this. That the tension moment of the story is what happens once they find it. Okay, it's what happens once they find it. Whether that treasure had been hidden or whether that treasure had been hunted. Once it's found, each man makes their next decision based on their values. Yesterday, my wife and I had an anniversary. 33 years we've been married, okay? Now, a lot of things have to go right for you, by the way, okay? You have to get married when you're really young, to be young as we are, and anyway. But 35 years ago, we literally accidentally stumbled into each other. We weren't looking, it was just like, hey, wow, can you believe that? And I think I'm into you, and your friends say that you're into me, and so maybe this is a cool thing that's going to happen, and that's great, isn't it? But if someone doesn't ask someone out on a date and then say, you know what, I think we should have a second date. If someone doesn't actually make an effort to get to know the other one, then we don't get to 2 years later when we get married and we stand on the stage. If someone doesn't say, you know what, will you marry me? And then we're going to stand here and say, I do, in front of all these people, and I want the world to know that. And again, even that's great, okay? Even that's great. That was an amazing day. But if nobody keeps growing and learning and forgiving and loving and pursuing, listen, this is not a marriage message by any means, but I want to give a little nudge to the guys, the spouses, the men in the room, that I know a lot of us thought that we were on a quest to find her, and then we got her, and listen, you were charming at one time, dude. You were amazing. And she was like, who is this guy? And then you got married and you stopped. And you were like, you know what? I got the prize. I captured her. It's over with. It's not over with. If I don't continue to pursue my wife and learn about her and know her and figure out how to love her better and work on forgiving and apologizing and saying if I don't continue a quest after this woman, there's not going to be a 34th, by the way. And we're not going to get to the picture that I showed you of my family in the end. Listen, is that clear? Okay. I know for many of you who have been in church, for years, we think this is just a given. Like, of course I want this to be true. And we think that following Jesus just happens naturally without any kind of effort. Jesus tells these stories about the kingdom of God to highlight the fact that the people who found it were forced then to make a decision on whether or not it was worth possessing. Right? Is it worth rearranging some things in my life in order to have it? And then they gave everything they had to have it. Hey, finding is great, isn't it? But it doesn't really change anything if you're not willing to rearrange at least some parts of your life around possessing it. Now, I want you to hear a story from someone who's able to talk about finding Jesus and following Jesus. And I want you to hear from my friend David. Check this out.
Hey, Christ Church family. My name is Dave, and I am a follower of Christ. By the time I was like a young teenager, I'd already started to get into a little bit of trouble. From that point on, I kind of just floated around in complete and total darkness. Somehow graduated high school, made it to college. I flunked out my first year of college because I started using heroin. Experimentation with drugs and alcohol really turned into like a full-fledged addiction for me. I found myself, homeless, living on the side of the street, in and out of rehabs, being in and out of jail and prison more times than I can actually care to count. The first time I ever was introduced to Christ was actually inside of a jail in South Florida. The funny paradox of the whole situation is when I left there, I probably felt like freer than I ever had, and I was still in jail. And I prayed to God, whatever's in your will for me, help me to accept that. Whether it's to go home or to do this time, just please give me some guidance here. The next day, they called my name and told me to pack up my stuff, and I didn't understand what was going on. And they told me I was going home, and I was like, wait, what? Like, I did this crime. Like, what do you mean I'm going home? I'm not supposed to leave. About a week after I got released, I found myself going from South Florida, and then I was homeless on the streets of Philly. And then I went, a week after that, I was in the ICU in Montana. I woke up in the hospital. I ended up getting in trouble again, but this time I got in trouble and I was on a run from the law, and my wife, who was not my girlfriend at that time, she had texted me and said that she was pregnant. I went and turned myself in on that charge, and I ended up going to prison for almost a couple years. My son was born while I was incarcerated. Started reading my Bible again and praying and just getting around people who were really just sharing that faith, you know, that and being empowered only the way God could do it to you, you know. I ended up coming home, and that was like 12 and a half years ago, and I never picked up another drug to this day again. Never took another sip of alcohol. One of the people that I was close to was my younger brother, Mike. He was 6 years younger than me. He did drugs like me growing up. My brother had fallen into a bit of depression. I had taken him right before Thanksgiving at the end of 2022 to the psychiatric unit in Jacksonville. A couple weeks later, I had picked him up, and he seemed like he was a little better. I had asked him, you know, how his time was, and he told me everything was okay. He stopped answering me, so I thought it was really weird, and I ended up a couple days later going to his apartment, and that's where I found him, overdosed from fentanyl in his apartment, in his living room. And that was probably like easily the roughest thing I think I've ever been through. Like a month after that happened, my son had told my wife that he wanted to start going to church. Being here was like the place where I just really was able to establish this deeper connection with Christ than I ever had before. I'm a pretty shy person, but I kind of went outside my shell and started joining groups, men's groups, Rooted, Mission Living. And like before you know it, like I started to become excited to meet new people and to be around people. I was able to watch the same kid who really led me here get baptized. You know, I think it was probably the most powerful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I think the most important part of everything that I learned, you know, while I've been here so far, and like through just my strengthening my relationship with Christ, is that I'm really on a mission, like to share this with other people. That's the most important part. You know, I'm just forever grateful to be part of this community, and also to just have a purpose in my life now and not feel like I'm living in complete darkness and walking around with no direction. Thank you for letting me tell my story.
I love his story because there's accidental and there's intentional, and there's just this process of just continuing to take next steps to grow in his love for Jesus. I just love that. And he said so many great things that he's on a pursuit. Now, what you're probably going is, okay, well, what are you asking me to do? Well, what I'm asking you to do is answer this question. What is the next step I will take to grow in my love for Jesus? Okay, I think some of us, maybe, if you're like me, grew up in church and you were never given permission to pursue Jesus one step at a time. It was like, hey, you were baptized, where will you be a missionary? I'm like, I don't want to do that. And maybe that's a call for some of you, but maybe it's just taking a next step. So how do I know more of what Jesus said and taught so I can do what Jesus did and love like he loved and value the things that he valued. And I'm going to give you two options. One is what I would call pathway next steps, okay? This is where the app is your friend, okay? You say, well, what do you mean? Well, a couple of years back, we actually designed what I would consider to be a pathway of next steps that is possible if you just continue to take the one that we lay out for you in front of you. You're not gonna be able to help but to follow Jesus. Okay, so I just believe that with 100% certainty. David referred to a number of them. Let me tell you really quickly. Like if you're a guest today, your next step is to come back next week. Could you do that? Could you go, hey, let me just see if this is for me or if this is my place, and then you come back another week after that. And you got to make sure you connect with somebody, a guest service person, fill out our online connection card, because once we get your info, it puts you into a communication loop that will continue to point you to your next step. After the service, stop at one of the entrances and maybe just figure out, hey, what do I do next? And they will tell you what you should do next is come to a VIP lunch. It's actually next week. And it's free. We feed you lunch. At worst case, you get free lunch. And there's no commitment, nothing like that. At lunch, we're going to say, hey, your next step is to go to partnership, where we talk more about the mission of our church, and we explain this pathway in more detail. But right now, I would just simply ask you to do the next thing. Because one step at a time is how we end up rearranging our life around following Jesus. The next step for a lot of us, and he referred to it, was to step into a group. All of our groups launch on January the 26th. He mentioned Rooted. If you're new to our church, if you're new to faith, that's a lot of you, I would recommend Rooted. You learn how to have daily time, you get together with a group of people and discuss it, and then you have some larger group experiences. And Root has just been a really great thing, and it hits on so many different kinds of things, right? Knowing God and prayer and handling your money and serving and figuring out your mission. If you've been through Rooted, jump into a message-based group, okay? That's where this is one-way communication, and it's some benefit, but when you get in a group of other people, you can go, listen, I don't think he's right, or that was amazing, or you can solidify your next steps out of the message. I think you can grow more by drilling down on fewer things. That's why I love message-based groups. This time around, we're offering Financial Peace. If you were with us at the end of the last year, during November, we did a generosity series, and I pointed you towards Financial Peace. All of our groups go roughly 10 weeks, so that regardless of what group you're in, we're all in group at the same time together. Now, that's a planned pathway, okay? A series of next steps that if you just take the next one that we point you towards, there's always going to be movement, okay? There's always movement, and I think you'll grow in your love for Jesus. That's kind of like a pathway. It's planned. I want to just take the last few minutes and spend on what I might call personal pathways, though, okay? And it's really an all play here. I had a little bit of time after everybody left and the house cleared out, and I go, oh yeah, that's what it's like to have some quiet. And someone left me with a cold, so I'm just sitting on the couch, and just had a few minutes to just think about the new year. And again, you're going to go, really? That's what you came up with in the last 2 weeks? But if I could have one prayer or dream or desire or goal for us collectively as a church this year, it's so simple. It would just be that we would simply choose to follow Jesus. And I know that's what you would expect to hear, but listen, I mean really, truly follow Jesus. And I want to give you what I would consider to be a near guaranteed way to follow Jesus this year. And there's only 2 questions you have to answer to discover your next step, okay? It's an all play. So whether you're reading your Bible on your own, whether you're sitting in a circle with a group of other friends, or whether you're sitting here engaging in a moment like this one, I've laid this out before. We've spent a lot more time in it in the past. I'll keep doing it, because if you answer them, you'll be following, you'll be pursuing, you'll be on this quest to know Jesus. Question 1, what is Jesus saying? What is Jesus saying? You have got to find a way to get a source of truth in your life. And who are you going to trust to be that source of truth? Okay, Jesus said, I am the truth. Jesus said every time he speaks, he's speaking the truth. When me or someone like me gets up here and we open up the scriptures every week, we say, listen, or we get in a group, we go, listen, this right here, this is true. And so we have to decide if we're going to trust what Jesus says is true. And if so, we need to know the kinds of things that he taught and how he lived. And are you open to the possibility that truth is different than what you thought it might be or even hoped it would be? See, you simply cannot follow Jesus if you don't know what he said or what he did. So you're going to have to be exposed to the scriptures, to read them, to listen to them. I was talking to somebody earlier today. They read the Bible this year. It took them all year, but they did it, and that's amazing. You're like, I couldn't do that. You could do that. If you read for 15 minutes or less a day, you could read the whole Bible this year. I'm trying something different this year. I'm doing more listening. So if you see me at the gym and I have my AirPods in, you're like, man, I wonder what he's jamming to that makes him look so amazingly fit. Guess what? I'm listening to some dude read the Bible. That's what's happening right now, okay? Because I can get 30 minutes or 45 minutes and bam, I'm listening to it being read. But what is Jesus saying? Number two, what am I going to do? Okay. The question is not, do I like what Jesus is saying, or does it even make sense? The question for every single person to answer is, what am I going to do? And it's true for absolutely everything that we teach here. Read the Bible, yes, you should do that. Memorize the Bible, yes. Study the Bible, yes, you should do that. But if it doesn't cause you to actually do anything different, or you don't adjust your life and lay what you think alongside of what Jesus says, and then daily say, okay, today I will align my life with your words. If that doesn't happen, you cannot move forward into a better life. And listen, what Jesus says doesn't always, probably never, jives with what our culture is telling us. It doesn't always make sense in our minds, and we don't always see it or agree with it. But am I willing to trust that what Jesus says is true? And if I step towards it, it will lead me to a better life. I think every single one of us is probably one obedient step away from loving Jesus more this year. Because you just imagine for a second, right, if all of us had those two questions running in our hearts and minds this year. Okay, what is Jesus saying? In other words, what's true? What am I going to do? There's truth and there's action. It means that this year would end up becoming the year that many of us would say yes to following Jesus for the very first time. Right? This would be the year that you actually settle it. Right? If you're being exposed to truth, because is Jesus the way, right? Is true life found in Jesus? Is Jesus the one to really connect us back into a relationship with God the Father? Is Jesus really a sacrifice needed for my sin? I think those sound like pretty important things to answer, don't you? And you probably don't need more information. You probably need confirmation. That's what a lot of you say. Hey, give me a sign. Here's your sign, okay? You should follow Jesus this year, okay? And some of you need to make this an intentional pursuit this year, and some of you stumbled upon this in the last year. For some of you, those answers will lead you to your next step, which is baptism. This tank is up here almost every week. It's usually clean, sometimes warm, and it's ready to go for you. Because when we find Jesus and we follow Jesus, we should demonstrate that decision publicly in baptism. Hey, we baptize by immersion. I personally think it's the best representation that I am giving my life, my full and complete self to Jesus. I think it's a beautiful picture of death, burial, and resurrection to Jesus, whom we are committing our life to. It's a huge moment of trust, right? Physically, I tell people this all the time. I'm going to baptize some people today, and I tell them, listen, I'm going to take you under the water. I will make sure you come out, right? But you're trusting me to do that. But you're making a statement, okay? I surrender my life to the leadership of Jesus. I'm all in, and I want people to know. At the end of 2023, we had baptized 108 people here at Christ Church in 2023 alone. And I went into 24 going, man, that is amazing. I bet we never see that again. And last year, 101 people decided to take the next step of baptism with Jesus, so it's just been an amazing thing. For a lot of us, okay, the answer to those two questions will lead us to step into generosity and financial giving, right? Even tithing, that it's not just something that people do who have extra money, right? When we're exposed to the truth where God says, honor me with the first and the best, then we go, okay, am I going to do that or not? Am I going to put my money where my mouth is? And okay, I'm going to do this to grow my trust in Jesus. Let me just finish with this. I think there's a lot of opportunity in what we're going to be teaching this year. to go, what is Jesus saying? What am I going to do? So when we get through this little short series that's been creatively and wonderfully titled Metaphor, Matt didn't like it. We're going to teach, and you're going to be in your group season on, for lack of a better idea, the kingdom of God. Okay, I felt like that's what we need to do this year. I don't know why. Maybe it has something to do with the inauguration, and we're going to have a president, but he's not the king. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But we're talking about God's people and God's place living under God's rule and blessing. So, am I building my kingdom? Am I building his kingdom? And if he's the king, then we live by his rules. So what kind of king? Who are the citizens, and how do we advance it? And then we're going to get to Easter. And after Easter, in the same way last year, you're like, man, thank you so much for doing that series on mental health. I'm about to make a lot of you very upset with what we do after Easter, okay? So I just want to prepare you for it now. And you can decide now if you want to sit here until then to go through it. I am going to pull on the last 6+ years that any kind of trust you all have in me. And we're going to teach about sexuality. Listen, when I was in 5th grade, my parents signed the waiver, and I went through the classes, and I watched the videos, and I heard the talks about parts and how they work. Yet we probably never got any kind of insight into how it all works emotionally and spiritually. How do we take away and not add to the guilt and the shame that a lot of us might feel about it, while we also hold on to the call? There's a kingdom call to live godly and to do it different as citizens of a different kingdom. You with me? So we're going to talk about gender. We're going to talk about sex. How we've been doing it isn't working. And let's get a vision for ourselves, okay? To be the people of God that that aren't going to lead another person to be someone they don't want to be either. How do the followers of Jesus do it differently so that people go, wow, that is so different? Who's excited about that? Hey, listen, if you're not excited about it, could you get excited about it for your kids, okay? That we can do it differently. What is Jesus saying? What am I going to do? It might be your money, your time, your talents, your relationships, your parenting, your marriage, your work, your decisions. How can I better demonstrate my life is committed to the kingdom of God and to Jesus? Listen, when you find and then you follow Jesus, it's going to feel like, for many of us, we are rearranging our life. So, do I want that? And if so, just take the next step that's in front of you. Because the quest to grow in our love for Jesus is really the sum of a lot of years. David just mentioned it, right? Of taking the next step. One day after another day, after a week, after a month, after a year. And the key to seeing it become a reality is to daily ask, what step can I take today to follow Jesus? I think when Matt sings this amazing song, there's a number of ways for you to respond. And it might be prayer. It might be to worship with him. It might be to take communion if you're a follower of Jesus in the back of the seat in front of you. We're going to celebrate some baptism. And you go, you know what? I should be baptized today. Then just come to the back corner. We'll make it happen for you today. But God, today we say thank you for these words. We thank you that you have preserved truth for us. God, thank you that you honor our desire for truth and sometimes a step forward and a step back. But God, I pray today that we would commit ourselves to take the next one, to love you more and better. And we're going to pray these things in your name today. Amen.
And I don't want anything but you. You're more than every dream come true. And all of the things I thought I wanted don't and give me Jesus. You can have all this world, and you can have all this world. More than silver, more than gold, and you are the treasure that I hold. Now that I've tasted of your goodness, nothing else will satisfy. So give me Jesus, give me Jesus. You can have all this world. You can have all this world. And I don't want anyone else, and I don't need anything else. You are my one thing. You are my one thing. I don't want anyone else, and I don't need anything else. 'Cause you are my one thing. You are my one thing. I don't want anyone else, and I don't need anything else. You are my one thing. 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 Oh, you are my one thing. Give me Jesus, and give me Jesus, and you can have all this world, and you can have all this world. Give me Jesus, and give me Jesus. You can have all this world, and you can have all this world. Just give me Jesus.
Thank you so much for joining us for our first gathering of 2025 here in the building. It's been a great day so far. Every year as we look towards the new year, we metaphorically close the door on the last year and we look forward to the next year. And I don't know about you, that's daunting to me. Like, what are my goals? What am I going to do? I sometimes get bogged down in that. But what a great reminder today that we just have one goal, and that is to wake every day and ask the question, how can I grow in my love for Jesus? I'm so appreciative for Dave just being vulnerable and sharing his story with us. And although our lives may look different from his, there are a few things that are the same. We each are going to go through, or we have been through a time where maybe we struggled, we felt hopeless, we didn't know what to do next. But by taking the very next step in growing in our love for Jesus, our lives can change. Our families' lives can potentially change, and those around us. And so I'm just so appreciative that he shared his heart with us, and such a great reminder of that. So if you have made a decision today, maybe you have some questions. What would it look like if I placed my life into the hands of Jesus? If I put my faith and my trust in him and I surrendered my life? Or maybe you're ready to take that next step and to declare it publicly through baptism. We would love for you to join somebody from our prayer team. We'll be at either of these tables up front, and they would love to talk to you about that and pray with you. If you've made a decision or you have some questions about connection groups, this is something that we push everybody towards. Connection groups are so important. You're going to build relationships there. You're going to have an opportunity to be, like David said, surrounded around people that are also chasing after Jesus, and they're encouraging you. Please just join us at one of the tents out front, or you can visit our website or our app and find out more about our connection groups. But I urge you, get out of your comfort zone and take that next step. And none of that would be possible without your generosity. Generosity makes everything possible, just for us to be here, to be gathered together, to hear stories like David of life change that can happen by taking next steps in how we are making Jesus just everything in our life, how we are going to grow in our love for him. So thank you for that. We are so appreciative. And for baptisms that happened, let's give them one more praise. If you would like to give, you can do that with the envelope in front of you. You can tuck it in there, give it to an usher as you leave. You can give on the app or online, but however you give, we just thank you so much. Next week, week 2, we're going to talk about how we're going to grow in our love for each other. You don't want to miss it. Bring a friend with you, and we'll see you then.
Like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me dancing. Like I can fly and don't even think of touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand